Give me liberty or give me death! Give me liberty or give me death! Refuse now! Do not do this! You have the obligation to refuse unlawful orders, okay?
Tonight, 1,700 National Guard troops are now set to mobilize across 19 states over the coming weeks. They are going to help Homeland Security execute a sweeping federal crime and immigration crackdown that is under.
The Trump administration seems to be having trouble taking responsibility for its actions. If you look up fascism on the Merriam-Webster website, part of the definition is severe economic and social regimentation by forcible oppression of opposition. In Texas, if you haven't heard, they're attempting to redistrict their congressional maps to allow 5 more Republican seats into the House of Representatives. State Democrats had fled the state in order to prevent this redistricting from being voted on. Ultimately, the Democrats came back to the state, and this past Monday, they were all locked in the Capitol building and only allowed permission to leave if they could sign a permission slip and only with a police escort. Nicole Collier refused to be treated like a child and ended up the first prisoner to be forcibly kept within the Capitol building in order for the Republican Party to guarantee enough people in attendance to vote on their new redistricting map. Other representatives, some tearing up their permission slips on live TV, stayed with her in solidarity. And she ended up detained there for more than 24 hours. In an interview since she's come out, she has voiced a mood of disappointment for any representative that calls himself a Democrat and won't be confrontational to this new political climate. Ultimately, the redistricting did go through, and Nicole Collier is suing for unlawful detainment. They did live stream their slumber party, though, and so news got out fast, and the Capitol building became a victim of threats from anonymous online social accounts, allowing law enforcement the right to cancel planned protests in front of the Capitol. Also here, I have a clip from a Fox News reporter where she jokes about locking them all in before the fact.
Yesterday I told you this. Once they're in there, you can lock the doors until everybody votes on what needs to be done. Well, one lawmaker said she didn't want to be followed by a DPS trooper, so she didn't sign the agreement, which means she didn't have written permission to leave, so she didn't.
6:17 a.m. How was your night on the House floor?
It's cold.
It's real cold.
Nicole Collier spent the entire night in the Capitol, and she has to stay there until the session is called again on Wednesday. You might be asking, is that legal? Yes, it is. In certain circumstances, Texas law does allow for lawmakers to be locked in the building, especially if they're breaking quorum, which Texas House Democrats did. The Texas Speaker of the House issued civil arrest warrants for the Texas Democrats, but because they were out of state, that was unenforceable. But now that they're in Texas state lines, it is. Hope that helps. I'm Lena, your news anchor bestie. You can follow me if you care about this stuff.
She even claimed that under certain circumstances, this is a legal form of civil arrest. The only conditions that allow a civil arrest are if they are during a session in order to bring people to the session, and if those people are absent from the Capitol. Nicole was imprisoned 2 days before the special session, and she was present in the Capitol when her right to leave was taken away from her. This would make this ordeal fall under Texas's unlawful restraint laws, which only have 2 exceptions, and both of those only apply to minors. And one of those exceptions is for when you're trying to forcibly gain lawful custody of a child. Of course, the Republican state would have a legal provision for taking ownership of a kid by force. Literally, the exception applies to any relative, including a creepy brother, uncle, or cousin, as well as perhaps being excluded from their law's definition of restraint, which is restricting a person's movement without consent so that as to interfere substantially with a person's liberty by moving the person from one place to another or by confining the person. And without consent is further defined as by force, intimidation, or deception. Of course, the Repedophile Party was asked to do all this by President Trump. In fact, Trump's exact words were that he was entitled to it. In other forms of totally not fascism, currently 19 US states have National Guard deployed to help either with ICE raids or crime. This includes my home state of Ohio, and this also includes our country's capital, Washington, D.C. In D.C., they were deployed to reduce crime rate, but they raided homeless camps, and estimates suggest that the military action might cost as much as 4 times the cost to house those homeless. It's not like he has a team of people whose job it is to run those kind of numbers to find the efficient way to prevent crime. Well, that's actually how it started, right? A group of teens attacked a Doge staffer earlier this month, and that was the fuel for the National Guard takeover approach to crime. This man who calls himself Big Balls turns out to be the wipeout for democracy. Big Balls is a 19-year-old longtime Elon fan with some minor connection to cybercrime via a business he ran in high school. Anyways, crime was at a 30-year all-time low in the city just before the takeover, but by some statistics has dropped an additional 40% since the takeover, as well as similar decreases in dinner reservations for some reason. You know who wrote this book? If your guess was the governor of Maryland, you'd be correct. Under his leadership, Baltimore's crime rate is down 40% from 2021 and getting close to being at 50-year lows. This reform is a combination of gun control, investment of next-generation technology associated with response to help responders get more accurate data quicker, and providing new up-to-date resources and training for those on the other side of a 911 call. That is to say, a reform of the workforce behind emergency communication, rather than putting more bodies in streets. Governor Wes Moore has also applied funding to programs that help elderly afford their basic needs, education from cradle to career, and the construction of more park facilities, including spaces for community events and public fitness. These on their own sound unrelated to crime, but research has found that poor elderly are more likely to be a victim of crime. A Michigan University study has found that funding for public education reduces crime into adulthood, and a report found on PubMed Central found that youth access to parks with green spaces, fitness equipment, and spaces for interacting with their neighborhood can deter gang violence and reduce crime. Wes Moore is playing the long game that Trump promised, and he's managed to pay for each of these programs with less than $200 million total, primarily for Baltimore, but also benefiting the surrounding areas and other places in Maryland. Some estimates find that Trump's military occupation of D.C. could cost as much as $1 million per day, and not likely to hold once the troops are dismissed. That price is also going to increase as Republican states are lending their forces to the operations in D.C. Wes Moore has formally invited Trump to Baltimore so he could prove his methods to him in form of a civil discussion about safety policy. This was in response to insults he received from the White House after questioning Trump's plan. A White House spokesperson said that Governor Moore should maybe take a page out of the president's playbook to stop the rampant crime in Baltimore, the fourth most dangerous place in the U.S. At the very least, Wesmore isn't bumping elbows with guys named Big Balls, and his citizens aren't being scared out of restaurants by the National Guard. Trump just can't handle accountability for his embarrassments. Have a good day and stay a fan.
One, it is not sustainable. You cannot continue this type of pace of operations, particularly when it's costing over $1 million a day in order to do this. The second, it's not scalable. You're not going to be able to do this in every single major American city, particularly when many of the cities that have the highest crime rates are the places that have actually deployed their National Guards to Washington, D.C. So who's going to go do the work in their cities? The third, it's unconstitutional. It's a direct violation of the 10th Amendment. And if for a party that talks about state rights, it's amazing how they're having such a big government approach in the way they're conducting public safety. The fourth reason is because it's deeply disrespectful to the members of the National Guard. As someone who actually deployed overseas and served my country in combat, to ask these men and women to do a job that they're not trained for is just deeply disrespectful. And so when we're thinking about all of these lasting factors, when we're thinking about the fact that it serves as a distraction from the fact that the president's disastrous economic policies are making everything more expensive for everyday Americans and making life harder for everyday Americans, there is a multitude of reasons that I am against this, and I will not authorize the Maryland National Guard to be utilized for this.